It's like something out of a horror movie. 9 bodies were found dismembered in a car on a remote Mexican highway, and authorities are desperately searching for answers. Among the victims was a young mother who vanished while on vacation, and authorities say it is possible someone actually survived this horrific situation. But answers, they remain elusive, and now there is reporting that the victims could have been involved in some sort of criminal activity in the wrong place, leading to their deaths. But is this all just misinformation? I'm going to be speaking with former FBI agent Bobby Chacon to break down everything we know so far about this disturbing story. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Jacqueline Ile Meza Cazares was reportedly supposed to be enjoying a relaxing vacation with friends on the sun-soaked beaches of Mexico's Oaxaca coast at the end of February. But instead, the 23-year-old mother of 2 vanished without a trace, leaving her family in panic, desperate for answers. But here's the thing. As frightening as that is, her disappearance was just the beginning of something much more horrifying, because the investigation into her death would culminate in the discovery of 9 dismembered bodies, 4 women, 5 men, abandoned in a car on a remote highway. And that gruesome find has sent shockwaves throughout Mexico, raising questions about possible cartel violence, government accountability, the safety of tourists in one of the country's most popular destinations. Now, according to reporting from El País, the nightmare began on February 27th, when 29-year-old Angie Lizeth Perez Garcia and 19-year-old Brenda Mariel Salas Moya were last seen in Santa Maria Hualtuco, a city in Oaxaca. According to police, the 2 women were traveling in a Ford Fiesta with Yucatan license plates when they disappeared, and we know this because police say they reviewed CCTV footage capturing the last known sighting of the friends on February 24th, driving along a highway approximately 90 miles west of where their remains were found. Then, according to El País, the next day, Raul Emmanuel Gonzalez Lozano and Noemi Yamileth Lopez Moratia, both 28, went missing after being seen at a local beach. 21-year-old Leslie Noya Trejo was also reported missing from that same area that day. This is along with 2 other people, Ruben Antonio Ramos and Rolando Armando Evaristo, both 22. The families of these missing people were left in the dark. They were frantically searching for answers. The search involved police and the prosecutor's offices from 3 different areas, possibly complicating the investigation. But Jacqueline's distraught mother took to Facebook to plead for help. According to the outlet El País, she wrote, "My daughter disappeared last night on a beach in Hualtuco called Cipolite. They took her, and until now, we know nothing about my daughter. She was taken from a food place near the same beach. 2 little ones, 5 and 3 years old, are waiting for her." The mother of 2 had a whole family to get back to, a life waiting for her. But that day would never come. A few days later, on March 2nd, the nightmare took a horrifying turn. Authorities in San Jose Miahuatlan, apologies if I mispronounced that, it's a municipality on the border of Puebla and Oaxaca, discovered an abandoned dark gray Volkswagen Vento on the side of the highway. Inside that car, they found a scene of just unimaginable brutality. And I want you to brace yourselves because this is horrifying. According to Central Puebla Irrevente, 4 bodies were stuffed into the trunk, and then there were 5 that were found under a blood-soaked tarp inside the vehicle. El País reports a bag containing 8 pairs of severed hands were also discovered, with 2 additional hands found in the trunk. The bodies reportedly showed signs of bullet wounds, torture. Removing them from the car took several hours. And that discovery, as I mentioned, it sent shockwaves throughout the region. And clearly this has now been broadcast around the world. But initial reports suggested that the victims were the missing people, but authorities were cautious. Unfortunately, though, we really don't know anything about who could have done this to these people or why, but rumors have circulated, they've swirled, that a local gang or cartel could be involved. We do know that when police made the initial discovery, the victims couldn't be immediately identified. In a press conference on March 3rd, the head of the State Attorney General's office in Puebla, Adamas Pastor Petencourt, said, "So far I can't offer information. All relevant investigations are being carried out. When we have a response and the investigation is complete, we will be in a position to provide more information. Now, before I go any further, I want to bring back on friend of the show, former FBI agent Bobby Chacon, to talk about what is a very, very disturbing case. Thank you so much for jumping on this. Your thoughts on this, and also what are some of the steps you think law enforcement are going to be taking now to try to solve what is a gruesome, gruesome crime?
Yeah, Jesse, thanks. Thanks. Good seeing you again. Look, the obviously in Mexico, when you get this level of violence, the assumption is cartel, because we've seen like a big level of violence in cartel, horrific violence by the cartels. But what makes this case different and why we're talking about it is the victims. Usually, if these were 6 or 8 rival cartel members, the case would be closed. We'd know what happened. But the fact that these people, and they all weren't taken in a group, the fact that they were 2 here and 2 there and 3 there makes it very unusual. These were basically tourists, Mexican tourists in their own country, but tourists, enjoying vacation away from their families. It's a very unusual case in that respect. The victims are what make this case unusual. The level of violence, sure, it's obviously horrific, but the cartels are known for that. But this is not what the cartels do. Cartels don't kidnap Mexican tourists or even U.S. tourists. That's not their game. We see that cartel versus cartel violence, but we don't see that generally against, civilians and citizens of the country. When you do see an abduction or a disappearance of 2 people like that, normally you get a ransom demand and it's a kidnapping and things like that. But that didn't happen in this case. This was a real mystery on, who carried out. Now, as an investigator, one thing, when you have 7 sets of hands or whatever, how many there were in a bag. When I used to work mob cases in New York City, they used to cut the hands off sometimes to delay identification. And so the fact that they were in a bag makes me think that, did they forget to take the bag? Were they rushed out of there and they dropped the bag or whatever? But the hands in the bag, normally is a sign of a kind of a forensic countermeasure where you kind of take them away so they can't be fingerprinted and identified readily. They'll be eventually identified, but it delays that. So that's a real odd part to this, because it looks more like a professional hit, when hands are in a bag like that.
And I wanted you to keep that in mind in terms of the identification. Was it purposeful to leave it there? Were they rushed? They couldn't clean up as much as they wanted. And look, the thing that I thought about is to carry this out, you have to have the opportunity and the resources to do this, right? You have to have the ability to, again, if you take this reporting is true, to torture these people, to kill them, to mutilate their bodies. You can't just do that on the open road. This had to have been somewhere else, right? And it seems to me,
it had to be multiple people carrying it out. Sure. You have to have multiple people, and you have to bring the tools. So you have to have planning in advance. So whoever's doing this is actually thinking, I'm going to torture you. It didn't happen spur of the moment. This is a planned thing. They had to have, there's multiple people involved. There's, tools to, you can't just dismember bodies, very difficult. So one of the things you're going to look at is how the hands were severed. Is it a professional job? Is it a sloppy job? That kind of stuff will tell them who they're dealing with. But again, it goes back to motive. Like, why would these people take them? Why were these people targeted? By no accounts are they wealthy people. There were no ransom demands. They weren't involved in gangs or gang violence. So it begs a question of, why this was done. And that's the real disturbing thing. Obviously, the level of violence is disturbing, but why these people were just killed in general is a real mystery here, because there doesn't seem to be any motive for this group of people to be taken, and have this done to them.
Well, as the investigation unfolded, and we're talking about identities, some of the victims' identities were revealed. I mean, Central Pueblo Irvente reported that Angie Perez Garcia and Leslie Trejo, they were confirmed through ID cards that were apparently found at the scene. And Oaxaca's Attorney General reported that the other victims included Raul Gonzalez Lozano, Noemi Lopez Mortilla, Ruben Ramos, Rolando Evaristo, and at this time, the 9th victim remains unidentified. But Bobby, going back to your question that you made before, to leave the ID cards, to leave the hands, part of me was like, well, is it to send a message to know who these people are? Or was it somebody who was sloppy, or a group of people who were sloppy, or were they in a rush and couldn't get rid of all the evidence they needed to? I mean, I hate to be talking, I'm not trying to be callous, but we're trying to understand a little bit more about this investigation.
No, absolutely. And at that, as an investigator, that's what you have to think. You have to kind of put yourself in the mindset of the criminal and see like what happened here. Like in the mindset, I took them here and I'm taking their hands, I'm cutting their hands off, cutting someone's hands off just for the sake of it. It doesn't make sense. Now, there have been serial killers who ritualistically dismember people, but that's not what we have here. And so, the only reason to take your time to dismember people's hands, I would think, is to delay identification. But why you would leave ID cards behind, again, it's another part of the mystery. I mean, as an investigator, I think what they're doing is you have to look in the backgrounds of each of these individuals and see if there's any connection. Obviously, the people that were traveling together are connected, they're friends or whatever. But see if those separate, disparate sets of people that were taken and this happened, is there any connection to them? Do they have any common denominators? Do they have any common people that they know in their lives? Do they do business with a common business? You have to kind of find a connection between the victims, and maybe that could lead you to a suspect.
And I will tell you, there's also a really bizarre twist to all this, is that one of the missing women, Brenda Salas Moya, who had been reported missing alongside Angie, she was found alive in Puebla. Now, authorities haven't provided details about her condition or how she ended up there. But Bobby, is it connected? Is it not? How key is the fact that you have somebody here who was reported missing is now alive? I don't know what information she may have, but I feel that that's a critical element.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge piece. I mean, to get a living victim to give you information on, like, where was your friend? Now, hopefully, her friend didn't wander off and she was abducted when they were apart. But she could give vital information on, if she witnessed the abduction, or if they attempted to take her too. She would have vital information. She could even say where her friend was taken, or even if the friend wandered off, give a general area where they were abducted from. And then, like you said earlier, they may capture them on video. Now we captured some of the victims moving around on video, but maybe they can, if they can get video of one of these abductions happening, then you can maybe identify people or vehicle that the abductors were in. So having a live victim is a huge piece, and she can hopefully shed some light on how her friend disappeared, when, where, and those kind of things. She might have some really vital information.
And not surprisingly for the families, this news devastating. So Jacqueline Meza's sister, Monica, confirmed her sister's death in a heartfelt Instagram post, writing, "Rest in peace, my little angels. It was no way to die, and even less for you. You deserved another farewell." Leslie Noya's sister, Carla, also shared her grief on Facebook, writing, "My beautiful girl, they have taken you from my life, and I could not protect you. I don't have the mind now to be able to accept what is happening. I wish that all this was a nightmare and that tomorrow everything would be fine. Your only mistake was trusting the wrong people, my girl." And authorities have been very tight-lipped about the case, leaving families, the public, frustrated. The Oaxaca prosecutor's office has opened an investigation into the potential involvement of local police in the disappearance. No suspects have been named, but, Bobby, let's just go back here for a second. In your experience, if you know, what should we be thinking in terms of the Mexican authorities here? How confident are you in law enforcement and prosecutors to get to the bottom of all this? And you hear a little bit of a concern raised by the family.
Yeah, no, I think in a case like this, everything's going to have to be super quiet. And I wouldn't expect to hear from the prosecutors or the investigators until there's a break in the case, because this type of case in this area, there could be additional threats to additional victims if they talk. Depending on who did this and their motive. When I saw that local police may be involved, they have to have a reason to base that on, right? And so I wonder what that information is. And once you have local police involved, whether it's corrupt U.S. cops or anywhere in the world, when you have corrupt police officers, you have that extra threat level. They could be trying to monitor the investigation. They could be seeing who the witnesses are in the investigation. Hopefully they have the one living witness secured at a safe house or somewhere where she's safe. Because once you have corrupt police involved, then that elevates all the threats to remaining victims out there and to the case itself. So everything has to be done really quietly, in almost secret. You would hope that they can somehow alert the family as to what's going on. And even if they can't tell them exact details, they meet with them. They tell them, we're working on this. We have everybody involved in it. So you can give that family some level of comfort. This is a horrific thing that has changed these families' lives forever, and they need some confidence that something's going to get done for their loved ones.
Well, here's the issue. So according to El País, the lack of transparency, that has fueled speculation and misinformation. And some media outlets allegedly falsely linked the victims to a criminal group called Los Zacapotlas. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that one too, but there are screenshots of a group chat purported to be between group members that have been spreading online, but El País reports that they've seen the messages and none of the victims' names are ever mentioned and there's no evidence to connect them with criminal activity. But one of the reasons that there's this link to cartel crime, according to Newsweek, has to do with this odd coincidence that played out on the same day. So the outlet reported that on February 28th, Jose Alfredo Lavariega Canseco, who's allegedly the leader of this group, this cartel, was shot and killed. And NVI Noticias even reported that he was found with a message that read, "That's what you get for being a thief." But Angie Lizette's mother adamantly denied that her daughter's disappearance had anything to do with Canseco, telling El País, "My daughter had nothing to do with that group. If they really investigate, they will find out that there are many things there, and my daughter did not deserve that." Bobby, what do you make of all that?
Well, look, the first thing is transparency. We all want transparency. We all think transparency is good, but sometimes transparency can't be practiced in an investigation, certainly at certain points in the investigation. This is kind of a new investigation. We're early on in this investigation. So I don't think anybody should attach the lack of transparency in either, corruption, or they're not doing their job, or they're not sympathetic enough towards the victims. I think sometimes investigations can be sensitive enough that the lack of transparency is really due to protecting potential witnesses out there and protecting future victims. So I would say at this point in the investigation, I think the lack of transparency is probably necessary because of the situation you have, because we don't really know what happened. I have to have confidence that the investigators have kind of an idea, and so that's why they're practicing, this lack of transparency. However, even here, we've learned that you can meet with the families and you can kind of give them that confidence that something's being done for their loved ones without having to reveal too much about your investigation. Sometimes families really get hurt by not being involved too much in the investigation, but sometimes that's for their own good. And sometimes it's for the betterment of the investigation. So you really have to kind of keep that in mind, when you see family members come out and kind of criticize the police for not keeping them as updated as possible, that sometimes the investigation just doesn't allow that. However, there's no excuse for any police department not having someone outreach to victims' families and that such, and just let them know what's going on.
What are the challenges, though, that law enforcement may face if this is a criminal organization or cartel-related crimes in Mexico?
The challenges are twofold, in my opinion, in this particular case. The challenges are typically just fear of the cartels, and nobody wanted to say anything because, obviously whoever carried this out is capable of horrific violence, of unbelievable violence, right? And so if that type of person instills fear in everyone, and so if someone out there knows a little bit about maybe what happened, they don't want to talk because they don't want the same thing happening to them, because these are clearly people that don't care about you in life, and it's people that can just take someone off the street and murder them in horrific ways. So it instills fear. That's the first thing. The first element is a challenge to investigators is the fear of witnesses, potential witnesses coming forward, or you go knock on someone's door and they don't tell you anything, even though they might know something. The second one is, as we said earlier, potential police corruption in this case. And so that's a second layer. That can also instill fear in the local population to come forward, but it also could, if they're trying to monitor the investigation, it could also give the bad guys some inside track on how to avoid, any further evidence developing against them. So I think the potential of police corruption and just a fear that this kind of crime instills in people, those are the two challenges, I think, going forward.
And look, we don't know the definitive answers behind this, but to provide a little bit more context, this discovery, this gruesome discovery, this is not an isolated incident. So Mexico, just talking about cartels for a second, it has been plagued by cartel violence, with more than 30,000 murders reported in 2023 alone. This is according to the Secretariat of Security and Civil Protection. That is a staggering number. But that was actually about a 6.7% decline from 2022, which recorded more than 33,000 homicides. So to put that kind of in perspective, the total population of Mexico is about 129 million people, according to data from 2023. So that means around, 0.02% of people die there every year from homicides. And cartel violence on its own, it's a different breed of crime. Groups often use extreme brutality to intimidate rivals and assert dominance. The tactics such as dismemberment, decapitation, public displays of mutilated bodies, they're designed to instill fear, send a message. And in recent years, cartels have reportedly even turned to cannibalism as part of initiation rituals for new recruits. A man using a fake name to try to protect him told Telemundo that he spent 3 months in a new generation training camp where recruits were allegedly forced to eat human flesh. Jalisco New Generation allegedly even posted videos of trainees eating the hearts of rivals. The discovery of the 9 bodies in Pueblo, along with the apparent torture and severing of hands, we don't know for sure, but you could make the argument, as we've been talking about, fits the cartel's pattern of violence. And as the investigation continues, these families of these victims, they are left to mourn their loved ones. They are demanding answers. The case has highlighted the pervasive issue of disappearances in Mexico, where more than 110,000 people are currently missing. This is according to the United Nations. And the UN also reports that the impunity rates hover around 95% impunity rates, being the percentage of illegal activities that end up going unpunished. Bobby, as I've read those stats, and we're talking about the high levels of cartel violence in Mexico, why has it persisted for so long, and why that degree of violence?
Well, that's, 2 questions. So the degree of violence is because there's so much money to be made in these cartels. And obviously they're all warring over, that piece of the pie, right? And so they're just, the brutal violence that comes along with that. And the second is, corruption at every level of government. And that kind of money, drives corruption. And so when you have people not making a lot of money who get offered bribes that are 1, 2, 3 times their annual salary for doing something, think about it. People got to feed their kids. I'm not justifying corruption. I'm just saying that's how it happens. And so those 2 things alone, and look, we say cartel war, right? We say the cartel wars. Well, look how many, if the U.S. had a presence in another country and we were losing 30,000 soldiers a year, that's a war. And that would be a war we would want to end very quickly, because we don't want 30,000 U.S. Soldiers getting killed. That's a war. So what Mexico has is a war going on. I mean, the number of bodies that you just cited, that's a war. Countries lose that much in a war and quickly try to end the war if they're losing that many citizens to whatever it is. This is a plague. It's a war. And, the Mexican government has allowed it to go on, for far too long. And that's part of the corruption of it. So I think that, that's what you have to look at. The United Nations needs to look at that. And Mexico itself has to kind of take a good look at those issues, because that's what's happening.
Does the FBI, the DEA, do they play any role in this at all, in combating cartel activity in Mexico?
Absolutely. I mean, both the FBI and DEA have offices all over Mexico. We have a huge FBI office in Mexico City. We have a small one in Guadalajara. We have, the DEA has offices there as well. So we're constantly working together with DEA, with the Mexican authorities to combat the cartels. And I think that, sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. But what the biggest impediment of that effort is corruption at different levels of the Mexican government.
When do you think we'll get answers as to what's going on here? Or when do you think the family will get answers as to what's going on here?
In this kind of case, it's tough because, like you said, Mexico is not immune to this level of violence. We've seen it before. However, the thing that makes this case unique and different is the victims. These are not typical cartel victims. I don't think they're cartel victims at all. I don't think any of them had anything to do with the cartel. So it's really difficult to say because of that. I mean, look, if it was cartel violence, if these 9 victims were identified as cartel members, we wouldn't even be talking about this. It would be case closed. We know what happened. We just got to find who did it. First of all, we have to know why this happened to these people. Why these people? And so once you have that, you know probably who did it. If you know the why, you know who, and then you get your evidence and go after them. But in this case, it could happen in a day. It could happen in 6 months. It depends on, what kind of break they get, because it's not, it's a mystery because of the victims, who the victim. These were innocent civilian victims. And that's what makes this case horrific.
And the families are demanding justice. They're demanding answers. And just to be clear, we don't know there's what's going on. We don't have any possible, the Mexican authorities haven't indicated any possible suspects or motives at this time. So a lot of this is a little speculative, but it is important to address the current climate and situation and the aspects and circumstances surrounding what happened to these people. Really disturbing case. We'll keep a careful eye on it. Bobby Chacon, thanks so much for taking the time and breaking it down for us. Really appreciate it.
Always good to see you, Jesse. Thanks.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.